June 2008. Lord's Cricket Ground, London. A helicopter drops out of the sky and lands in the middle of the pitch. Out steps a Texan in a linen suit, flanked by security. One guard carries a clear Perspex case. Inside, $20 million in cash. The crowd goes wild. This is Sir Alan Stanford, knighted by a foreign government, billionaire, cricket's newest best friend. The $20 million is the prize for a winner-take-all match he personally created. Nobody on that pitch knows the truth. Every dollar in that case, and every dollar behind the empire that made it, was stolen. In less than 12 months, this man will be arrested and sentenced to 110 years in prison for one of the largest financial frauds in American history. This is how a small-town Texan convinced a Caribbean government to knight him and use that title to rob 30,000 people of $7 billion. Before we get into it, if you're into stories about the biggest financial cons in history, the ones the mainstream true crime channels never touch, this channel is exactly where you want to be. Hit subscribe now, because this story only gets crazier from here. Robert Allen Stanford built his empire from a regional financial business in Texas, turning it into Stanford Financial Group, anchored by Stanford International Bank, headquartered on the island of Antigua. Stanford's bank looked almost boring. No derivatives, no complicated tech, just certificates of deposit, the same safe investment your grandparents put retirement money into. His brochures were conservative, careful, trustworthy. Some were literally wrapped in the American flag. The returns looked incredible. Between 2003 and 2007, Stanford International Bank reported annual returns of 10 to 14%, year after year, almost never dipping. In a constantly moving market, that kind of consistency wasn't reassuring. It was impossible. But Stanford wasn't selling to Wall Street sophisticates. He was selling to retirees, small business owners, and immigrant communities across Latin America who wanted their money somewhere safer than their home country's banks. In 2007, while American banks paid 3 to 4% on a one-year CD, Stanford's bank offered 7.5%. By 2008, Stanford Financial claimed to manage $50 billion across 100 countries. 30,000 investors had bought in. Then came the move that made him untouchable. In 2006, Antigua and Barbuda formally knighted him, Knight Commander of the Order of the Nation. He wasn't Alan Stanford, Texas businessman anymore. He was Sir Alan. Every business card, every press release, every handshake. A knighthood from a government most Americans couldn't find on a map, and it worked. If a country puts its own name behind you, why would anyone assume you were a fraud? Stanford's next move was pure theater. He fell publicly in love with cricket, pouring money into stadiums, teams, and tournaments across the Caribbean. Then he struck a deal with the England and Wales Cricket Board, worth around $100 million, built around winner-take-all 2020 matches. The first carried a $20 million prize. Winner takes all, loser walks away with nothing. Unheard of in the sport. That's the match where he landed on Lord's, stepped out with his security team, and posed next to a case stuffed with cash. Here's the part every fraud in this genre has in common. He wasn't hiding. He wanted maximum visibility. Knighthoods, stadiums, helicopters, cash, all designed to answer one unspoken question before anyone could ask it. Would a fraud really do all this in public? For 20 years, the answer people gave themselves was no. Quick pause. If this is blowing your mind so far, wait until you hear how this whole empire got taken down by one guy with a laptop and a spreadsheet. Make sure you're subscribed and the bell is on, because I post stories like this regularly. And drop a comment below telling me which financial collapse you want covered next. I actually read every one of them. The person who cracked Stanford open wasn't a regulator or an FBI agent. It was a financial analyst named Alex Dalmody, based in Florida, who wasn't even investigating Stanford. He was reviewing a friend's investment portfolio when Stanford International Bank's numbers crossed his desk. Dalmody asked basic questions almost nobody in the financial press had asked out loud. Why did this bank use the same tiny Antiguan accounting firm for over a decade? Why were reported returns so smooth when actual markets are never smooth? Why was a bank promising conservative returns paying returns that conservative investments simply don't produce? In January 2009, Dalmody published his findings in a Venezuelan financial newsletter. His conclusion? Every warning sign of the fraud that had just brought down Bernie Madoff. The timing was devastating. Madoff's arrest was still fresh. The financial world was hunting for the next hidden Ponzi scheme, and Dalmody handed them a name. Bloomberg, Reuters, and the Financial Times picked it up. Within weeks, regulators were moving. On February 17, 2009, the SEC charged Stanford with massive ongoing fraud. FBI agents raided offices in Houston, Memphis, and Tupelo. Stanford reportedly tried to arrange a private flight out of the country that same day. 2 days later, Agents found him in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and froze his assets, cornered for the first time in 20 years. Behind the scenes, the fraud was unraveling. Investigators discovered that Stanford's chief financial officer had quietly inflated the value of a single Caribbean resort property on paper from $63.5 million to $3.2 billion, purely to plug the hole left by Stanford's personal loans and failed investments. For 4 months, Stanford remained free on civil charges. Then, on June 18, 2009, he surrendered to FBI agents at his sister's house in Virginia. The following day, a federal grand jury unsealed a 21-count indictment against Stanford, his chief investment officer, 2 accountants, and most damning of all, the actual head of Antigua's Financial Regulatory Commission, accused of taking bribes to keep Stanford's books from ever being examined. The regulator meant to catch him had allegedly been paid to look away. A judge denied bail. In 2009, an inmate assaulted Stanford in detention, leaving him hospitalized with a concussion. His legal team argued the assault had caused amnesia so severe he couldn't remember his own life, his relationships, his business, his children's childhoods. Prosecutors argued he was faking. After a formal competency hearing, the court ruled he was fit to stand trial. In January 2012, Stanford's criminal trial began in Houston. 6 weeks of testimony, investors describing life savings wiped out, former employees describing a culture built to hide the truth, financial records laying bare exactly how the fraud had worked for 2 decades. On March 6, 2012, the jury convicted him on 13 of the 14 counts. At sentencing, over 350 victim impact letters had been submitted. Given the chance to speak, Stanford didn't apologize. He spoke for 40 minutes, criticizing the government's tactics, blaming the 2008 financial crisis, reminiscing about the powerful people he used to ride horses with. Not once did he express remorse for the 30,000 people he'd stolen from. The judge sentenced him to 110 years in federal prison. If a story like this deserves anything, it's more people knowing it happened. So if you made it this far, do me a favor. Hit subscribe, tap that like button, and drop a comment with one word that describes how you'd feel finding out your safe retirement fund was built on this. I want to see what you all say. Almost none of the 30,000 victims ever got their money back in full. Courts recovered a fraction of what was stolen, around $330 million from foreign accounts, against a total fraud of $7 billion. For retirees and small business owners across Latin America and the Caribbean who trusted Stanford precisely because he seemed safer than their local banks, the money was simply gone. The man who landed a helicopter full of cash on the most famous cricket ground in the world is currently serving his sentence in a federal prison in Florida, with a release date that doesn't arrive until the next century. What makes this story different isn't the size, it's how visible it all was. Stanford didn't hide his wealth, he used it loudly, in public, on a cricket pitch, with a government-issued title, precisely because most people assume no one would dare fake something that big, that publicly, for that long. He was wrong. And for 20 years, so was everyone who trusted him. That's the story of the fake knight who stole $7 billion. If you want more deep dives into the biggest financial collapses in history, subscribe, hit the bell so you don't miss the next one, and let me know in the comments which case you want me to break down next. See you in the next one.